Robert Nakamoto, who was a Japanese American born in Sacramento, California. During World War II, he was sent to an internment camp. Before the U.S. entered the war, how did you feel as part of the American society?
Let me clarify something a little bit, because my grandfolks came over in the 1890s. I'm a third generation Japanese American, and there were second generation Americans that came in the 1920s, and a few that came from Japan just before the start of World War II. So the opinion I express may be quite different from some of the others, but they'll be my opinion, and that I'm not speaking for the others.
Okay, so how was life like back then before the war began?
Life back then before the war was fairly normal. I grew up on a farm. We felt pretty integrated. We went to school like everybody else. We worked like everybody else, and that we had in this community a pretty good assimilation of the so-called the whites, the Portuguese, the Chinese, and the Japanese American too.
And how did life change when the U.S. entered the war?
Well, life changed pretty dramatically in the sense that we were given Executive Order 9066 signed by President Roosevelt at that time, which relocated people of Japanese ancestry to 120,000 people from Hawaii and the Cal states, California, Oregon, and Washington, to the interior parts of the United States. And our particular family wound up in what's called Topaz, Utah, which at that time was in the desert in Utah, and we had about 8,000 people there. But at the other time it seemed kind of ridiculous, because for 8,000 people there's 4 MPs guarding us. Life changed pretty dramatically in the sense that we were given about a week's notice, and being the oldest of 6 children then, each one of us carried 1 suitcase and was told to leave.
Before the internment, how was your family? Like, what did they do and how large was it?
Well, our family was farmers. Fortunately, our family has been in the United States long enough that we owned a family farm free and clear, which is unlike the second generation Japanese Americans who were getting started.
When the executive order was issued, how did your parents feel at that moment?
Well, my parents were pretty silent. They pretty much didn't express any anger or hostility. They just said that the government might be making a mistake, but we'll go along with it. We'll do a peaceful transition, and we'll see how it comes out. Now, some of the other Japanese Americans were pretty hostile in the sense that they thought that their civil rights were being violated, and that a few of them even went to court to challenge the evacuation claim, and eventually those that did challenge it did get a presidential pardon.
So did you personally feel a sense of hostility during that time when it was?
I think I was too young to feel much hostility. I do know that the older, especially the real old people, felt somewhat hostile. But you understand the Japanese American culture, we kind of accepted things as they were, and to see what would come out and see what would be best overall for the community and the country. So.
Yeah, can you describe the relocation process and how you felt? What happened?
Well, the relocation process is pretty simple. The soldiers came, just to carry 1 suitcase, no guns, no flashlights, things like that. We got on a train, and we were relocated, and that's pretty much it. We wound up in what looked like Army-style barracks, and that we're all pushed together into a barracks. The thing I recall, the thing that struck me was that when you go into that kind of environment, I've never seen so many toilets bound up in one place in my life until then.
And how was life like in the internment camp?
It was pretty simple. We just did things like recreation. We did go to school. think the one exception being in Utah was that the curriculum was heavily about the state of Utah. We studied the history of Utah instead of the history of the United States. But aside from that, we played basketball, baseball, football, worked out in the gardens and things like that. So.
Were there any negative parts, the negative characteristics of the internment camps?
The negative part was that very close living quarters. The barracks were not, might say, insulated. It was cold in the winter and hot in the summer, and that the entire family was in what might be called 3 rooms, and that we had to go outside to go to the latrine. We had to go outside to go eat and things like that.
And do you recall how your parents felt that time?
My parents are pretty silent. I'm sure they had some anger, but they didn't really express it to our kids because they didn't want our kids to be prejudiced to see food come out of the newsroom. Now that's the opinion of most of the 3rd generation Japanese Americans, but the 2nd generation Japanese Americans were probably a lot more angrier than we were.
Were there any attempts to escape the camp?
There was some attempt to escape, but like I said earlier, in a camp of 8,004 MPs, we freely roamed inside and outside the gates. In fact, our Boy Scout troops at that time went as far as 100, 150 miles out of the camp for camping trips and things like that. So.
What happened when the order was lifted, and how was the journey home?
When the order was lifted, again, we were told that we can go back on the train, which we did, back to our home, and that in our case, we're very fortunate in the sense that we owned a family farm. We had a very good Portuguese family that took care of our house and farm, and they moved out, and we just moved back in. So for us, it was a lot simpler. But for many of the others, it was pretty difficult because they had really no place to go. Some had to rent places, some stayed in the school barracks and things like that. So, but our family had it easier compared to the others.
And when you returned to your home, your original home, was there a sense of feeling that struck you?
A sense of feeling in what sense?
Did you have any did you feel in a certain way that you were back?
Well,
really glad that you were
I
back?
think there was some resentment because during World War II, a lot of the people from the Midwest, like Nebraska, Kansas, and so forth, had moved to the West, and I guess some of them are called Okies, and they showed some prejudice against us in the sense that they were kicked out of their house by us. Their jobs were kind of lost by us, so to speak, and that we did a lot to assimilate back into the community, and I think there's some economic loss from the people that did migrate from the Midwest to the West Coast, taking over the Japanese economy.
Did the internment process change your views on the American society?
For me, I think I was too young to say to change my views, but I think some of the, like I said, I'm a 3rd generation. Some of the 2nd generation were pretty bitter about that. My father said that if it wasn't for the internment process and the land, we lost a gas station, a restaurant, 2 boarding houses, and about 10 acres of land, and we got paid for that in 1958 based on 10 cents on the dollar, but the dollar is based on 1939 prices. He said, geez, I could have afforded to send you to Stanford if it wasn't for camp, but then you have to go to the University of California.
How did the end of the war affect your life?
Well, the end of the war affected my life in the sense that this was another era. We started high school, and that you might say, we went back to the farm, and we tried to become living as normal American citizens. There was some prejudice, but the families that we knew, the Caucasian families and the others that we knew from before the war were pretty much the same. So I don't think it affected us that much.
In retrospect, how do you feel about the executive order?
In retrospect, I think the executive order was a mistake. I think Congress realized that, and that President Reagan, signed the order to give us a repatriation, of which I think of the 120,000, 60,000 people got a presidential pardon and $20,000, which was eventually signed by George Bush. So I think there was an economic loss. Yeah.
So do you think that the reparations were adequate or inadequate?
Well, when you get paid in 1958 based on 10 cents in the dollar or 1939 prices, you couldn't say that's very adequate.
And during all this time, how did white Americans treated you, and how did the war affected that?
Well, like I said earlier, the white Americans that we knew before treated us just like before. But some of the white Americans that migrated from the Midwest indicated some hostility because they had a sense of loss, in the sense that we moved in back to our houses, and that we took away jobs that they might have had to perpetuate. So.
When you think about this topic, or when this topic is brought up, what specific memories do you remember?
In terms of remembrance, I think it probably, in some ways, some of the people will disagree with me, but I think it did the Japanese American community some good in the sense that from the camps, of which there were 8 of them, people relocated all over the United States to Boston, Philadelphia, New York. In fact, there was a Japanese American senior citizen home in New Jersey. Friends were in Chicago and St. Louis and Denver. So there's a wide disbursement of Japanese American all over the United States, and that they probably did them some good in the sense that they were no longer concentrated as they were before World War II.
Yeah. As a child, how did the war and the internment affect you, being young?
As a child, it probably didn't affect me very much. I didn't come out of the camp with any hostility, any anger, some disappointment, some loss of economic stability for the family, and I did kind of feel sorry for the other Japanese Americans who were not so long in this country like we were, in the sense that I remember some of my friends, when they got out of camp going to high school, had like 1 pair of shoes and 2 pair of pants and maybe 3 shirts, as opposed to myself who had a sport coat and all that. Excuse me.
During that time, how was the feeling of the politics of the war? How were the feelings of the politics of the war? Like the fact that the U.S. were fighting the Japanese and
What, you mean fighting the Japanese?
Yeah, like how did the fact that the U.S. was at war with Japan, was there any feelings, hard feelings about that?
Well, I think there's some, you might say, ignorance in the sense that most of the people that got drafted and volunteered for the Army, Air Force, etc., felt that kind of like a love-hate traitor relationship with the home country, and that it was very difficult for a lot of people to adjust to the fact that your mother country has attacked the country that you're living in. So.
And finally, do you have any stories about, anecdotes, any stories about that time you were in the internment camps?
Well, not really, because for me, life was, except for the cramped quarters, fairly normal. The thing that bothered me the most was that with a relative that we had very close geographically in California. We got dispersed all over the country. Like my mother's mother got sent to Arkansas, so we didn't see them for 3 years, and things like that.
Are there anything else you would like to say about the subject and your experiences?
Not about the experiences, except that I think there's a lot of loyal young Japanese Americans that volunteer for the military, and to my recollection, there's probably at least 25 people got the Congressional Medal of Honor for fighting in World War II, and although most of them fought in a European theater, a number of those that were versed in the Japanese language were retrained at the language school in Monterey and went to the Pacific and became interrogators of Japanese POWs. And I think to their credit, that probably shortened the war in the Pacific. So there's probably about, I'd say, 5,000 or 6,000 of those kinds of people. And contrary to what a lot of people don't know, that most people thought that we all went to Europe, but that's not true. A lot of them went to the Pacific. So. In fact, one of the Congressional Medal of Honor winners is Senator Inoue. He lost the arm. He and Senator Dole, ex-Senator Dole, spent some time in a VA hospital for about 2 years. And Senator Dole to this day claims that the reason why Senator Inoue was a Democrat was that he got too much bad blood transfusion while he was in the hospital. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Nakamoto, I thank you for your interview.
Okay. Sure.